This is a dream from last night, from the morning of May 20th. And it's a very interesting dream, and it has warnings for both Mormons and Jews, and probably anybody who goes to a church. So in the night before I went to bed, my wife and I were praying, and I asked, Father, please send me a dream, something that I could share on my blog. And so I posted this to my blog, dreamtraining.blogspot.com. And this is what happens. In the first scene, there's like a young man, and he seems to live in this really large warehouse. Somebody comes and knocks on the door, and the sister says, "You know what? Don't answer that." But he kind of looks through a crack between the window jamb and the curtain, and he sees that it's these two men in white shirts with black ties, and he says, "It's the Mormons." And he says, "I want to talk to them." So they invite them in, and they come in and sit. Normally you expect these Mormon missionaries to be two young guys just out of high school, but in this case, the team is a younger man, the typical age, and there's also an older man who's also kind of a thicker fellow. And they come in, and he starts trying to explain to them about Jesus, and they don't seem to understand. So he's like, "Okay, come sit over here, come sit over here. We have better lighting over here." And he's trying these different light switches, and each time the light switch is like a different variety. So that as I'm watching the dream, I begin to think, is this some kind of a warehouse where they sell lamps and just none of them work? Because every time they'd say, "Oh, we'll put them here. We think these lights will work," and then they don't work. And so he keeps trying these different switches in different locations. And finally, he gets them into one place. And he's thinking, well, what if I just turn on the lights across the way? Maybe the light will just reflect over to where they are. And that seems to work a little bit. They move them even into like a totally different room. And they get some reflected light bounce. And these two guys are looking over this book that they've given them. And they don't seem to understand what's being written there. Their eyebrows are furrowed. They're just staring at this literature. They don't know what they're looking at. So this is the interpretation of that part. The young man is trying to explain to them the truth of Jesus. He's trying to introduce them to the true Jesus. But no matter what he says, no matter how he presents it to them, these Mormons remain sitting in the dark. So you see how the dream kind of portrayed this, that he's trying to turn the light on for them, but no matter where he puts them, they sit in the dark. Like he thinks the lights work, but they just don't. So that's what this dream is symbolizing. He's trying to get the Mormons to see something, and the book is probably a Bible or a short testimonial, or maybe it's an evangelism tract, something like this. But these two guys are looking at it, and they just can't seem to comprehend what they're looking at. They can't see the letters on the page because they're in the darkness, something like this. And then at some point they return. It's about a week later, it might be a month, but they've been gone for some time. This is a second visit, and they come in, and he says to them, since the last time you were here, he had a dream about you. And he kind of tries to remember it, and then he recalls. And he stands up, and he looks very seriously at this young man. And he says, "The time is soon coming when Mormons will be rounded up. You are all on a list. Your names are on a list. They have you all on a list, and they will use it to round you up. If you want to survive, you must move. You must relocate to a new place where nobody knows you." And he just really is staring at this young Mormon man. He says, "You can fellowship with new friends, but don't give them your names. You can use a new name if you want, use a middle name or a nickname, but don't give them your name. So you want to move away so that when they activate that list in your local city and they start rounding up your former neighbors, you won't be there because you moved. And in the new city, you want to avoid getting put on the local list." These two Mormon men, they're really staring at the intensity of this young man sharing his vision, probably because, this guy isn't an official prophet, so how could he be receiving a word from God? But whether they received it or not, I don't know. In the next scene, it's this same young evangelist. So he leaves this building he was in, and he walks down the street. This is a very, I don't know, maybe it's like a port city or something, but it just seems to be a lot of warehouses here. The area seems really dry. Maybe it's in Israel. I really don't know where this series of dreams are set. So there's an assembly building of some sort, and I'm pretty sure that it is a synagogue, and I think we should all assume that it is a synagogue. And the way the building is laid out, there's kind of like an interior enclosed angle there, so that there's like a corner of the building on the outside, and the young men are kind of congregated in this area, and there's some seats out there, maybe some old car seats are piled up there or something, maybe just some chairs, but they're all sitting there, and they're just socializing quietly, respectfully. And the evangelist walks up to them, and he starts warning them that persecution is coming. He says, they're going to come for registries, meaning the registry of the synagogue, like whoever is registered with that synagogue, that they attend there, that they're a member there, they're going to come and they're going to take that and they're going to use that to go and round up these Jews. And so now he starts telling them a message that he believes is from the Lord. And he says, why do you even need to go to synagogue? He said, you can stay home and you can meet with friends. So he's telling them, like, you can have a God-centered fellowship, but all you really need is some friends. And he points to these 6 that are kind of sitting close, and he kind of sweeps his arm around them in a big oval, and he says, like, kind of circling those 6, and he says, you can just take these guys right here and you can pray together at home. And they're all listening to him because they're taking it somewhat seriously, at least. And he says, and this is what he says to them. He says, is it easier for you to share a personal problem in a small group or in front of 300 people in the assembly? What if, for example, I want to say I have a porn problem. Porn attacked me very badly this week. I had a bad week fighting the spirit of porn. And you want to pray with your friends. Which is better, an assembly or you and maybe 2 friends your age? And at this point, he's like pointing to like 2 young guys near, like, who would it be better? Would you rather trust these 2 friends or 300 people? He's pointing out to him, like, and he's trying to encourage them, like, you don't need to go to the synagogue. You can just stay home and pray. At this point, some of the young Jews, they just shrug it off, and they like really poo-poo and pshaw this. That's nonsense, they say, and a lot of them kind of walk off. But he is unflapped. He just keeps preaching his word, and he's looking for who is interested. And he finally finds this one guy. Now, there's a symbolism in the dream here that there's this big kind of a round thing seated there, and inside this round thing, and it looks like a big sheaf of wheat. Like, I had to really think about it after I was praying about the dream, trying to look for the interpretation and receive it. And this man was bound up in the sheaf of wheat. And I understand, like, this guy is one who is going to be harvested. He's bound for the harvest. This guy, he's going to receive Jesus at some point. And so this young man, he asked him, he said, well, what is the difference between what you believe and what we believe? And he says, both of us believe in Messiah. But we Christians believe that all the signs prophesied to identify the Messiah were fulfilled already when Jesus came. And he attempts to think of some specific scriptural examples, and he lists 2, and then he's looking in his memory, and he's got nothing. And he thinks to himself, he said, I should have memorized at least a dozen of these. Like, he thinks this to himself. But instead, he just says something a little more vague, and he says, well, in his birth, life, and ministry, Jesus fulfilled prophecies about the Messiah that were spoken of by Ezekiel, Amos, Jeremiah, and the majority of the Old Testament prophets. And so he finishes this one-on-one conversation. The young man has a few questions, and the evangelist answers those questions and heaps on more information for this young man to think about. And so then as he's leaving, he crosses the larger group again. They start talking to him some more. And it seems like these guys might be special forces soldiers, or at least that they're IDF soldiers. Like, these seem to be Israeli soldiers. So this is why I think that this whole scene takes place inside Israel. Although I don't know how many Mormons are evangelizing in Israel. So this guy tells me, I used to be special forces too. And he tells me, he said, I used to, when I was in special forces, if I would meet a special forces soldier from another country, I used to offer to fight them one-on-one. This was like a sign of respect, he said. And they said, well, did you ever fight an Israeli special forces? And the evangelist looks at him for a second, and he says, I lost. And so then these young men, they all laugh at him, like, you fought one of our guys and you got beat up. But this makes them open up to him. And so now they have a much more deeper conversation, and the young men are much more relaxed, and they're more open to everything he says. So he leaves this site at the synagogue, and he walks down, and he passes through what seems to be 2, maybe more, very large metal buildings, steel buildings, except there's also a wide section of the roof is open. So it's like some kind of an open bazaar, partially protected against wind and rain. And there are some people going around telling these people, they have little booths, like, you have to pack up everything and go home. You have to pack up and go home. And so one of the sellers turns to the evangelist and tells him, he says, they used to just tell us to close. Now they come right up to you and they force you to pack up. And I believe that this means that this is another sign that businesses will once again be closed, and that in the future they're going to be more aggressive about it. So now in the next scene, this same guy who was just evangelizing, he's calling someone, and he's reporting on apparently was a piece of spy work that he's been doing. And he says these people are preparing to... Now, who is his command and how he contacts them is not directly shown. But he says these people are planning to do a terrorist act. And he says they are really working on it right now. And so he receives orders from his command to go and destroy this plot. to take it down. So he climbs up onto this roof, and as he climbs up, he's thinking about what he said to the young Israeli soldiers. And he's thinking that the truth was that when he met this Israeli Special Forces soldier and offered to fight him, the Israeli Special Forces guy was just like, no thanks, I'll take a pass on that, and walked away. And so he had never really fought the guy, but he just gave a tactful answer because he knew that it would open up these young men and that would give him more opportunity. Now you see this picture here. So this RPG right here, this is a Russian-made RPG-22 from the 80s era, and apparently there were so many made that there are still some in circulation. And this looks a lot like what I saw, except that this, see how this cap hangs down at 45 degrees? That's what I saw in the dream that this agent had. He had something like this. So he shoulders it, and he's about to fire on this building when this huge truck comes and blocks him. So the trailer side of this truck is blocking his shot. So he runs across the roof and he slides down. This guy is just really committed to getting this done. He still doesn't have a shot from there. He slides down the roof further, and he comes down to where there's kind of a veranda, and there are a lot of people there, and the people see him, they start screaming, "Oh, call the authorities, oh no, this guy, and they're screaming. He runs around the building, still on the roof, and now he comes past a restaurant, and here the people inside the restaurant, they see him, and they freak out, and the majority of them start running out of the restaurant, some even with their hands, up in the air, waving, running out of the restaurant, right? So you see this, now in this graphic right here, this number 6, this looks, except for the last part where it tapers back down, that looks like, I didn't find an exact match for this RPG that the guy had, but this type of a weapon, this number 6, is called a thermobaric weapon. So, and I watched a video on YouTube. This guy fires a thermobaric RPG, and it goes inside a bus, goes inside a BRMD, and blows up inside. So just anybody that had been inside the bus or this Russian troop transport would have just been basically incinerated. So now at the bottom of this article, I have a great book. If you're a Mormon, this book is called Unveiling Grace. It's written by, if you know about Adam's Road, this young man Micah, who got out of the Mormon church and now has an amazing ministry helping other Mormons get set free. If you are a Mormon and you've ever wondered, is the Mormon way really the truth? Is it really absolute? These people, they're ex-Mormons, and they do a great job of showing you the problems with the history and the foundation of the LDS religion and what happened to them when they got out. So this is the man from Modesto, and this is not the first time that I've received this particular warning that they will use church registries to round people up. The same way they use a gun registry, they're going to use the church registry, and they're going to come around and round up Mormons, Jews, Christians, anybody with their name on a religious registry. So pray or be defeated.